And I get to meet Randy, who we've only exchanged never face to face. So this is kind of nice.
That's right. This is nice. It's good to meet you finally, Fred.
It's fine. Yeah, good to meet you too.
So hi, Fred. My name is Gay Adelman. I am a parent in Jefferson County Public Schools, and my son graduated in 2016. So I've been somehow, they've been unable to get rid of me, probably because I see what they're doing and I just can't let it go. But
well, good teachers always appreciate active parents, so that's a good thing.
Oh, okay. I'm not finding that much around here, but but if everybody go around the room and introduce yourselves to Fred, I'd appreciate it.
Oh, Harbin was hired December 2000.
Okay. Thank you. Now introduce yourself to Fred.
Oh, hi. I'm Yvonne Rivera. I teach Spanish to little people. So sorry about the whole Spanish thing. I wasn't thinking.
It's okay.
Greg Titchener. I'm a 14-year teacher within JCPS, a big portion of it as a substitute teacher, and now ECE teacher working with 5th and 6th grade EBD students.
Hi, Fred. We've had our paths have crossed at certain points, and we're both familiar with lawsuits to save teacher pensions. So it's good to finally meet you face to face. I'm Randy Week.
It's good to meet all of you, and you should know I retired now from the Park Ridge School District, which is just north and west of butts the city of Chicago. It's a district of about 400 to 500 teachers, 2 middle schools, and I was president of the IEA local in that district for about 10 years, and taught for about 30 years as a K-5 art teacher. So that's kind of my background.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining our call today. We're working on a town hall for tomorrow, and we'd like to share a video from this conversation with the attendees in our town hall. You recently had some success with fighting for teachers' pensions in Illinois. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, the success is mainly that we've been able to hold on to the promises that the Constitution of the state had guaranteed us. Now, every state, when it comes to public employee pensions, is different, of course. And Illinois is one of the few that have this constitutional guarantee within the language. It was written when the Illinois held a constitutional convention back in 1970. And there were a couple of delegates who were farsighted enough to know that even though we had a contractual obligation for the state to pay into our pension fund, that if it was left to the politicians, they would take the money that they owed us and spend it on other things, rather than, for example, raise taxes on the wealthy in the state. They would take the funds out of the budget and spend it on bridges and roads and other things that the state actually needs, but they would spend it from money that really was promised to the public employee, not just teachers, but all the public employee pension funds in the state, of which in Illinois there are 5. And so that's exactly what the politicians did. These delegates to the convention were smart enough to know, and they wrote down. That was one of the things that helped us, is that not only do we have language in our Constitution that says that our pension benefits can't be diminished or impaired, and uses that exact language, but we have the conversations that went on during the Constitutional Convention that talked about what they intended, which was that the politicians couldn't do this. Of course, it didn't stop the Illinois legislature from doing exactly that. And so over time, we've now have a unpaid liability of over 100 billion. I think it's up to 135 billion dollars. And there's no guarantees, no requirement that the politicians, and I think this is true in Kentucky as well, is that there's no requirement that they actually pay it. But we did have language that said they had to pay us the money that they had promised and which was contractual to the retirees of the state, that anyone who's in the pension system, those pension promises couldn't be diminished or impaired. As the crisis got worse and as the debt got higher and higher, although the percentage of unpaid liability for people who want to get into the weeds and all this stuff never really changed. It's been 40% unfunded or 40% funded for 30, 40 years. But they've been managed to pay all the retirees the money that they owed us. But the debt got worse and the liability got worse, which was actually a benefit to the banks who they borrowed the money from. So the banks and Wall Street were making they made their money. We were getting paid our pension, and the debt simply got worse and worse until it became a political liability as well as a financial liability. So around 2013, the legislature, under the leadership of the Democratic Speaker, who was also the head of the state's Democratic Party. Interesting that it was the Democrats who did this to us. So the Speaker of the House and Pat Quinn, who was the Democratic governor of the state and who claimed that he was put on this earth to solve the pension problem, and by solving it, he meant cutting benefits. And the Senate President, John Cullerton, all the Democrats in the state decided this was the time to solve the liability problem in our pension system. And they were going to solve it, of course, not by raising money and to pay it, but by cutting the benefits. And interestingly, I think especially to you folks, is that the two state teacher unions, in fact, all of the public employee teacher unions, all the unions that represented every public employee, the AFL-CIO, AFSCME, all of them went along with a plan by the Senate President, John Cullerton, to come up with a plan that wasn't as draconian as the one that Mike Madigan, the Speaker of the House, had come up with. And so they all thought, well, rather than really fight any cuts, we'll go along with the lesser of these two proposals. But that bill failed. And so the worst possible pension reform was passed by the Democrats and signed by the governor. And the unions kind of sat quietly. There was only one small organization. It had about 30,000 retired teachers and principals and other educators, called the Illinois Retired Teachers Association. They said, we're not going along with this, and we believe that the Constitution means what it says, and that our pensions can't be diminished or impaired. And so they filed suit. Defending the state was Lisa Madigan, who was the Attorney General, and this is Illinois politics after all, and she was the daughter of Michael Madigan, the longest serving Speaker of any state house in the country. So she was the Attorney General, and so her theory to combat the very explicit language. I mean, it's not vague when the Constitution says they can't diminish or impair your pension benefits. So she had to figure out a way to get around this. And she said, well, there's such a thing as what they call eminent domain, or what's also known as police powers. And so I'm going to go before the Illinois Supreme Court, which, by the way, had 4 Democrats out of 7 or 8 on the court, all picked by Michael Madigan to be on the Supreme Court. And so she went before the Supreme Court, and against the lawyers that were hired by money that we individually raised for the Illinois Retired Teachers Association to hire a lawyer. This is like the ultimate David and Goliath story, because even the teacher unions kind of grudgingly, because once the bill was passed, even they grudgingly came along with us. And so, but she argued before the court that the state had the police power to seize our pensions, like you would seize a building if the state wanted to clear land to build something, urban renewal or something, that they could take our pension and do the same thing. They had the police powers to steal our pension. That was her legal argument.
Wow.
Well, in 2015, the Illinois Supreme Court ruled unanimously that that was the dumbest argument anybody ever heard. In fact, they said it's absurd to think that the state has the right to solve a problem that they created by stealing the people whose pensions were being diminished or impaired. And it was like comparing it to someone who had murdered their parents and then threw themselves on the mercy of the court for being orphans. They said, you can't use the crisis that you created as an excuse for gutting the pension systems. And so that's essentially the law now, is that and by the way, every Democratic politician in the state, in the General Assembly, no matter whether they call themselves progressives or I don't know, social, whatever their political, they all voted for this. And in fact, when we met with a group of teachers, went to meet with one of the a very progressive state legislature up in the legislator up in the northern suburbs of Chicago. The night before they took the vote, she hadn't even read the bill yet, and yet she voted for it. And this was typical of those legislators that we met with, and they all voted for it. And the governor, of course, signed it. And the unions, as I say, were half, as they usually are, the leadership at least, kind of half-hearted in their obligation. It was really a rank and file that demanded that our rights be defended, and essentially we had to raise the money and defended our do what you folks I know have done many times, go to court and have the courts because it's an interesting question is why the courts, which a lot of folks thought were in the pocket of the speaker of the House, why they would decide to go against the powerful people in the legislature and in the mayor's office in Chicago at the time. It was Rahm Emanuel, who also had an interest in gutting pensions, and the Cook County board president, Tony Preckwinkle, who also was interested in cutting pensions. So why would the court do this? And I think it's a lesson for us, for people everywhere, is that at least now, I believe that the courts have an interest in the sort of like presenting a view that the courts have integrity. It's not that they would never cut our pensions, because I believe they were perfectly capable of doing it, but they didn't believe that the crisis was such that it required them to do it, and they were more interested in their own image in a way, and their own. I'm trying to think of the word, which I'm not. At 72, a lot of these things escape me. But I think the lesson here is that, one, we should never assume that just because someone's in power and just because they may be the longest serving Speaker of the House in a state like Illinois, which is known for its political corruption, but just because they've done something doesn't mean that the rank and file doesn't have the ability to turn things around. And the pension question is a very powerful one, because there are I know in your state, like in mine, there are retired public employees in every congressional district, in every state legislative district, and if they vote, then they have it's a huge power base, and and their pensions are a driver, I think, for getting people out to vote. It was interesting that when Pat Quinn ran against Bruce Rauner for governor, after he had signed this Senate Bill 1, which was the pension bill, that I estimate that roughly 10,000 people voted for Democrats, voted for like Dick Durbin, who's the Illinois state senator to Washington, and who was on the ballot at that time, he got 10,000 more votes. People left Pat Quinn's name blank. They didn't vote for Bruce Rauner, but they didn't vote for Pat Quinn. And the reason they didn't vote for Pat Quinn is because he sold us out on the pension question. And he's no longer governor. Mike Madigan has just been booted out as Speaker of the House. John Cullerton, who was responsible for the less worse pension cutting bill, he's no longer holds office. Elaine Nekritz, who was a state representative in the northern suburbs, was the leading voice in the state house on cutting benefits. She decided after the Supreme Court ruled that she would no longer hold her position. Dan Biss, who was a state senator in the district that our school district was in, and who we battled with over pensions, he quit his position as state senator, ran for governor against Bruce Rauner, and got creamed, mainly because retirees would not vote for even a Democrat against a Bruce Rauner. They would not vote based on the fact that they were betrayed on the pension question. So I guess that's the lesson I take from it, is that this is it's a powerful issue. It's important for retirees all over the country, because every public pension system in this country is under attack. And just let me say one last thing, and that is that I wrote this blog post, and people can read it at fredklonsky.com. I wrote the other day about where are these politicians now, because on tomorrow my pension check will be direct deposited into my account with the exact increase that I was promised, and that I have a contractual and constitutional right to. But people were concerned that I was gloating, that somehow that I was gloating over the fact that all these pension thieves are not only lost in the courts, but are now lost in the court of public opinion, you could say, and lost their seats, are no longer holding political office. And I guess in a way I am gloating because I like winning, but it's not really gloating, because I think the terrible thing right now is that all people who are I'm 72, in the midst of this horrendous pandemic where people are suffering, and especially older people are suffering, that everyone in this country doesn't have a pension in their retirement years like the one I have, and the one that public employees in Illinois have, and are now the courts have assured we will get. That's the crime. The crime is that we have millions of older people in this country that don't have what I have and should have what I. There's no reason why a person in the richest country in the world should work their entire lives and at best have a minimal amount of Social Security, which is not enough to pay people's bills or to live anything close to a comfortable life. And why shouldn't older people have a comfortable life in their retirement years? So that's the lesson I try to spread, is that people should know that I have a very good pension, and it's a pension that a system I paid into for over 30 years, and that I was guaranteed by contract and by constitutional obligation. But I think there's a moral obligation that people who work along a hard life and get to retire, don't have a pandemic kill them first, that they should be able to have good health insurance and a paycheck that they can count on and can give them the kind of life that they deserve. So I guess that's my story.
Let's see if thank you, Fred. Let's see if anybody has any questions that they want to run past you.
I did read that blog post about where are they now, Fred, and I'm hoping we can effect the same sorts of changes here in Kentucky. I was inspired by it.
Well, I certainly appreciate that. And if I could, anyone I could talk to in Kentucky is that nobody thought we could win. Back in 2013, going against these powerful folks, everybody told us, "Oh, the courts are in the pockets of Michael Madigan. He's got 4 votes on the court." Everybody told us this. Everybody all the pundits and the union and the heads of our unions, the head of the Illinois Education Association, retired chap, they all told us, they said, one, they called us the perfection, the bloggers who I'm allied with, people like Glenn Brown and John Dillon, who also have been pension activists like you guys and blogged about this. The union leadership called us the perfection caucus, as if we were demanding something that we didn't really deserve. And the other thing they said is they called us naive. Now, I've been involved in politics and school politics for 50 years, and so I don't consider myself naive. But but maybe naive is not a bad thing. Maybe expecting that you're going to get what you're promised is naive, and that the union leaders will actually represent the interests of the rank and file. I guess that's, to some people, is naive, but I don't apologize for being naive. I think sometimes if you do what you believe is a moral obligation and a legal obligation, then sometimes you win. That's if you fight, sometimes you win.
Sometimes it pays to be naive and not listen to those naysayers.
Yeah, I think so.
I had a quick question, and maybe you addressed it and I missed it, but did you do much collaborating with other organized labor, whether or not connected directly to that pension? Was there much in the way of an organized labor movement building?
Well, I'm going to tell you, Greg, organized labor was arrayed against us. They wanted they formed the state public employee unions anyway, and those representing the private sector really didn't get involved in this. But the leadership of the public employee unions, they formed a coalition of their own to try and get this lesser bill through the legislature, the one that would have cut retiree pension benefits. There are COLA increases 3 times. That was part of the bill. Was our annual COLA increases would be cut, done away with, and that was the position of this coalition of public employee unions. So I have to say that no, they were not on. They had to be pushed and shoved into finally joining the Illinois Retired Teachers Association in filing the suit. And it's interesting that the lead attorney, the one that actually made the argument before the Supreme Court, was the lawyer of the IRTA, not the public employee. They all sat in the back and were part of the suit finally at the end. But at the beginning and all during the fight, they were AWOL. And so sadly, the answer to that is no. We certainly would have wanted their support, and we constantly went to for example, the IEA's state representative assembly that they hold every year. We would run as delegates. We ran as delegates to get the unions to get our union to fight on behalf of our pension rights, but they just wouldn't do it. They just wouldn't do it. And I think that's a whole other kind of conversation to have someday as to why it is that the leadership of our unions are so slow. And if they take, I mean, we haven't, Illinois won the right to collective bargaining over 35 years ago. And frankly speaking, that was the last time the unions won a major political fight in the state legislature. what is it? You know, because they have no backbone, or they're bought off, or what? You know, that, I say that may be a conversation for another day, but it's a serious problem for certainly the future of public education. Not, I mean, if they're not willing to fight on behalf of the public school teachers and public education, if we don't have public education, we don't have teacher unions. So that's the dilemma, is that we can't get our unions to really fight, and we need them to defend public schools and public education.
And we're paying them a lot of money. We pay over $1,000 a year to fight for us, and they're just pocketing the money. And you know, we get milquetoast representation from our teacher association.
Randy, it's actually worse than if they pocketed it. I don't know, in a certain sense, I can wrap my head around that. But they take our money and they give it away to the very politicians who are attacking our pension rights. So in the case of Illinois, Michael Madigan, he's left his post as speaker with $13 million in his political action fund, not the Democratic Party's political action fund, his political action fund, and which of course he gets to keep when he's no longer a politician. And the IA is one of the main contributors to Friends of Michael Madigan. So teacher contributions, money that people like rank and file. I didn't get paid anything as a union president. This was because it was, you know, it was a small local. It was my volunteer time. But I contributed to the political action committee of the Illinois Education Association, only to find out later that, I mean, I thought I was giving it to elect pro-education candidates, only to find out that my union was simply a pass-through, and that money was going not to the candidates, but to the political action committee of Michael Madigan. So in a strange way, I would have been probably happier if they had taken the money and put it in their own pocket. Instead, they took that money and put it in Michael Madigan's pocket, and that makes no sense to me.
I want to know something about in Illinois. Did they, when you took them on, did they come to you? Because this is one of the arguments they've made here, is that, oh, you know, you can't piss off those people, because if you do, they'll be even meaner to us. I mean, we've got people who are basically QAnon here. I'm thinking, they've done everything bad thing they can do to us. You know, they're not that creative. They can't do any more bad things to us than they already have.
Yeah, no, you know, it's a problem. Of course, you know, if you're a union activist, this is a question that comes up even in your building, right? So, I mean, I was a local president and the grievance chair for years, and I would have individual teachers come up to me and say, "Well, I don't want to cause any trouble," and I would say, "Wait, this is a violation of the contract. If they get away with this, they can do this against any member." So I say, it's not a matter of whether we get in trouble. We're here to make trouble. If they're not going to, we have a contract. It's a binding legal requirement. And so if we have to file a grievance, we have to file a grievance. And you know, the interesting thing, Yvonne, is that in the 20 years between the time I was grievance chair and then president of my local, I must have filed dozens and dozens of grievances against principals and central office administration and the board itself, and we never lost one. Because what happens is, if you fight and you push, then eventually they go, you know, the cost of taking them on is bigger than we would have, than if we just abided by the contract in the first place. And so it might go to a second stage or a third, and eventually it never got resolved by an arbitrator. It got resolved because the board gave up, and they said it's not worth it. At least that's been my experience, is that if you fight, you win, and you don't win them all, but you win enough to make it worth the fight. And I think once people, the thing is that once the rank and file sees that you can win these fights and that you have people who are willing to take it on and make the fight, then it gives those who fight credibility that you will fight, and it shows that fighting gets results. And if it didn't get results, you wouldn't be able to convince anybody. No one's a saint. No one wants to just fight for its own sake, unless you're. But the point is that you do win. You do, yeah. and you can win. And that's what happened in Illinois. Nobody thought that, and still, I mean, they'll come back again. They'll come back again. This isn't, we're not done. As long as I mean, we just tried to get a change in the Constitution that would allow Illinois to have a progressive income tax. Now everybody, whether they're Ken Griffin, hedge fund manager and the richest man in Illinois, or me, well, I'm a retired teacher, so in Illinois, we don't pay state income tax anymore. We're trying to keep that. But a housemaid in a hotel downtown, or Ken Griffin, they all pay the same rate of income tax. And we tried to change that to get a constitutional amendment to allow for a graduated progressive income tax. And it failed. So the state will face economic crisis again. And when they do, pension funds are they're large. And who was it? The old bank robber who said, why did he rob banks? Because that's where the money is. And pension funds are where the money is. And when there's further state crises, they will find a way to go after it. And then we're going to have to fight it again.
Well, and clearly, if you don't fight, you definitely won't win. So,
that's the lesson. That's right.
So I want to try to summarize my interpretation of something that's happening now, and the teachers that are on this call can correct me if I'm wrong. And I want to get your perspective on it, because I want to know what advice you might give us if you were facing our dilemma today. And part of that is, of course, we're in the midst of a pandemic. So our state legislature reconvenes on Tuesday, but we're not allowed to go into the committee meetings and sit in the gallery and have our presence known like we were in 2018, which was the year that the bill that was referenced as the sewer bill passed. And as soon as they took that pension bill and took a bill that was for something else, it was for sewer legislation, and they stripped its contents and replaced it with a pension bill, and that's how it got the nickname sewer bill. And they passed it in the 11th hour of the legislative session, and that brought teachers out in droves to fight against it. And here we are 3 years later, I guess, because we've been able to push back and push back and push back and keep them from finalizing their strategy. But then this year in particular, the union leadership has worked with the same person who was the chairman of the sewer bill committee, if I'm remembering correctly, to orchestrate a bill that puts new hires on a different tier. So it's a 2-tier pension plan that will eventually expedite the continued draining of the pensions. We're sitting around 35 to 40% as well, so funding level. So it's a way to stop money going into the pension, because it's going to go, some of it will be going into it'll cut off the funding for the current employees, and eventually that well would run dry. But I don't see it being that much different than the 2018 bill, but because it's pandemic times and because union leadership actually helped write the bill, they're just asking everybody to turn their backs and not pay attention to what's about to pass. And how do you get rank and file to see past what's going on so that they can mobilize and save their pensions?
Well, I hesitate to talk about conditions that I'm really not, and on those kind of that kind of advice. Here's what I would say is that rather than give you advice, I want to say that I learned a tremendous amount from you guys and from teachers all over the country in during that whole year of red state teacher revolts that we saw in Virginia, in Virginia, really states all across the country, where, especially in right to work states, because what you did all that year was figure out how to wage a battle like this, and where the unions, like in Illinois, our unions are very powerful, even if they don't always fight for us. And in some ways, they control things more. During that red state teacher revolt in those right to work states, where the union's leadership had less control, all kinds of creative ways of wildcat strikes, and you know them better than I do, and so I think, in a way, rather than I don't think there's a blueprint for all this, and it's true, no one in the country has ever faced a situation like we're facing right now, with a pandemic, which has kept people locked in their homes and unable to organize in the old ways. But we're people who are organizers can sit down and figure this out and come up with creative means of organizing and of reaching out to people and of using the tools that are at their disposal to do that job. And I think that, just like you're doing now, and I think doing what you're doing is exactly what I would advise people to do, is to find ways using social media or whatever, and to communicate and to figure out a way to fight it. And these are unusual times. Nobody's had to face this ever before. Nobody can claim that they know the way to organize folks in a time like this. But of course, the same obstacles that we face are the obstacles that our opponents face, and it can be done. I just think it can be done.
Have we considered the long-term dilemmas that arise when no new taxes, even progressive ones, is permitted to be the norm for 40 years? It speaks to that, if not now, when, and it's just a matter of when, unless we're getting on top of some of this other stuff.
All right, listen, take care, you guys.
Thanks so much for your time.
Thanks, Fred. Thanks for popping in.
Bye-bye.
Nice to meet you.
Good to meet you.
Did you guys, before I pause it, I want to ask one other question. Do you guys know what our Constitution says, and if we have something similar?
Yes, we have an inviolable contract, and they cannot damage nor impair the basic benefit. Now, what they plan to do to sidestep around that is to push these expenses for pensions back onto the cities, which they were doing recently with Louisville. And Mayor Fisher was saying, I don't know where we're going to come up with $63 million to fund the pension. In other words, they simply do not pay it into the plan, leaving it to the cities. The cities can declare bankruptcy. The state cannot. So that was the slick move that they were going to attempt to do. And that is also what they're attempting to do with what they call now the legacy debt in this House Bill 258 and also House Bill 69 that Jerry Miller is sponsoring, which it will change the accounting standards to a future of 30 years. Jerry Miller is heading up both of those bills, 69 and 258. And you have to be very careful, since he was the promoter of the original sewer bill, and he's in the pension gamble, and he's depicted very clearly in a recording of the meeting, basically railroading any opposition to the sewer bill. So Jerry Miller's name on a bill, I've learned to be very, very cautious, and that is why we do have an inviolable contract unless they sidestep it.
And that's what they're figuring out ways to do.
That's what they're trying to do.
House Bill 5 also, which was passed in the first part of the session, and it's already been vetoed by the governor and probably will be overridden by House and Senate when the session, when part 2 of the session resumes. And if I'm correct, if I remember correctly, that's a CARA era. It's from the CARA days when the Kentucky Education Reform Act was passed. around that time, because boards and committees could be stacked with people that aren't really there for the concern for the people that they're entrusted to care for, but because they've been put there by people that are trying to figure out a way around things, right? And just like we saw with the education committee, after Bevan was voted out for very similar reasons that Fred Klonsky talked about, the people that, where are they now? They were so unpopular in the court of public opinion that they got voted out, just like Bevan did. And by removing Bevan and getting Bashir in place, one of his immediate mandates by the voters was to get rid of that education committee that had been stacked against education. There were not pro-public education people on the committee. They appointed a commissioner that was pro-charter. Like, all of that was clearly rigging the system, if you will. And so they're now trying to get rid of the governor's ability to dismantle boards, I should say, not just pension, but boards in general, boards and committees, the same way that he did with education, which puts the pension board at risk now, because they're currently stacking, or have already stacked, the pension board, if I'm not mistaken, with people that are familiar with the secret no bid contracts and where the money's going and the oversight of those pension dollars that the rest of the teachers and the public don't get to know the truth about. Am I incorrect on any of that?
That they do not know enough about the investments. They want to put people on there that will not resist whatever Gary Harbin suggests. It's similar to when Bevan appointed Wayne Lewis as education commissioner. He was basically doing Bevan's bidding. So you have to be very careful in eliminating the governor's power to at least balance those committees, especially with the sums of money in the billions that are involved in all of these transactions.
Absolutely, absolutely. And also, that's Chris Tovey's experience too. He was appointed to that committee, and then when he started asking too many questions, they got rid of him. So that's got some inside knowledge about how that behaved. So, all right, we're gonna probably just take some clips from this interview and make it part of our town hall, but I'll mention that the entire video is available online, and we'll go ahead and keep, if people want to watch this entire interview, we can reference it and direct people to it. Is there anything else we want to mention before we stop the recording of this episode? Anything else you guys want to mention about Illinois or how it relates to Kentucky? Anything?
It was interesting to hear that the unions allied themselves against the activists who were simply trying to preserve earned benefits, and that the unions, much like the ones here in Kentucky, were so willing to throw in the towel and compromise rather than to put up a fight. And it was inspiring to hear that against all odds, in a David versus Goliath fight, the activists were actually able to prevail. That heartened me to hear of Fred's experience, because we're facing the very same situation here. And I'm just always curious why our unions do not put up any sort of a fight, especially given the amount of money that's being leached and drained from the pensions.
That's another one on my question list here. So what procedural safeguards could be put in place to prevent this potential conflict of interest discussion in the future? That's where we need to be digging right now too.
Term limits.
It is heartening, you're right, Randy, to know that we're not alone and that we're not crazy. We're not crazy.
Part of it is being so tight with the people. You know, you're so palsy with the foxes, you're not keeping a very good eye on the hen house. You know, my good friend Jason Nemus wouldn't throw us under the bus. Hey, I think I got the tire tracks to prove it. Yeah, I kind of would. You know, it's Washington small. You know, regulators in bed with the people they should be regulating.